Today is our Kapitol conversation number 3. Again, name still pending. So hopefully we'll get a better name eventually. Today, we're going to talk about modular construction, particularly volumetric modular construction. And it's a sort of topical time to talk about it. I think this week, the week we're recording this, or maybe the week before, Mirvac announced a modular construction initiative. Built and Wesfarmers announced a modular constructive initiative. And I believe the federal budget's got a whole lot of tax reforms coming down the pipeline to address housing affordability, which is part of the thing that, what we're going to talk about. So I'll introduce the people joining us today and where they fit into the conversation, and we'll go from there. So Matt Koo, ICD. So Matt, maybe introduce yourself and maybe explain what ICD stands for, because some people will be familiar with ICD, but maybe not familiar with the name.
Yeah, and I guess the relevance to modular in our journey. I'm Matthew Koo. I run a property development company called ICD Property, which stands for Innovative Construction and Development. We shortened it after we decided not to do construction around about 15 years ago.
When doing the construction,
And modular has been a bit of a journey for us, actually. At the inception of ICD in 2009, the ideology was to introduce modular construction into Australia. We had a number of suburban projects and were exploring it as a means to develop it. And we came across quite a number of headwinds, enough to blow us back into being called ICD Property and becoming a traditional developer. But that was our first introduction, and it was good because we learnt a lot about what volumetric modular can be and the challenges around it, which I'm sure we'll touch a bit more on through this podcast. But then, really fast forward, probably about 2 years ago, we started to see some of those challenges fall away and some of the benefits really come to the surface. And so that's when we have jumped back in and haven't looked back.
Great. Andrew Morrison, head of modular, so at Kapitol.
Yeah.
So maybe brief explanation of your background and how you've got to be here working on modular construction.
Yeah, sure. So brand new role created by Kapitol around 6 months ago. When I joined Kapitol, which was great, spent most of my career in the consulting part of the industry, and really excited. I think for Kapitol and not just for Kapitol, but for the industry, because I think the opportunity in the industry right now is just really exciting to really change the face of construction. We're going to talk through the evolution of that as part of this podcast, hopefully. And I think, in terms of Kapitol, it's a bit of a natural evolution because, there's many different forms of modular or MMC, modern methods of construction. And there's, I guess, things that have become more mainstream. So things like bathroom pods are pretty mainstream now in apartments and towers and things like that. With the data centers, we've looked at modules in terms of, switch rooms, chillers, gen sets, those sorts of things. We've looked at prefabrication for risers and stormwater pipes and all those sorts of things. So prefabrication has always been part of, I guess, our journey at Kapitol, given that we are trying to innovate and increase efficiency on site. And so volumetric modular is sort of the next phase in that evolution, and we're really excited about what that means and the opportunity it unlocks for our clients, particularly around program savings, efficiencies on site, and addressing using it to solve a problem. So one of the things that probably everyone that knows me is sick of me saying is that you use technology to solve a problem, not for the sake of using technology. And so where you look at what are your challenges, what are your constraints, whether that's workforce, whether that's program, site access, whatever, looking at, things like modular to potentially unlock that. And we do have conversations with a lot of clients at the moment around, distressed sites or frustrated sites where they were bought at a time when the market conditions were different, and now due to rising construction costs or workforce constraints or supply chain constraints or whatever, those sites are no longer feasible. And so looking for ways to potentially unlock those sites. And so that's some of the opportunities that we're seeing in the market right now, which is really exciting.
Great. And Matt Stoddard from Ash Morgan. So
Yeah, so I'm Ash Morgan's development director. So I lead all of our Victorian development work and our sort of living sector vertical, which is a newer sector for us over the past few years. But I mean, traditionally, we're a private equity real estate firm. So we own and operate office buildings and large format retail across the eastern seaboard, and we'll go further where the opportunity takes us. But generally, that's sort of been the core business. But over the last few years, like many, we've got into particularly the build-to-rent space, and with a sort of a growing portfolio, working with Kapitol in the Docklands to deliver our first apartment building, which is 626 units, and then we'll evolve that into stage 2, and we've got some more sort of exciting opportunities and pipeline stuff to sort of become one of the bigger players in build-to-rent over the next few years, which is exciting for us. And I think on the development side, I mean, we're not a reluctant developer, but we're a developer that craves certainty, like everybody. And so I think the opportunity of modular and MMC is actually a really exciting one for the whole development community, if we can find a way to get on board with it, because the uncertainty of development in times like this makes it harder and harder to get projects going. So if we can find pathways to get cost certainty and time certainty and design outcomes up front, like while that might be a uncomfortable change for how we do things, I think the tailwinds, which Matt was sort of alluding to before the last few years, there's lots of things starting to line up that really make this a really credible pathway, from institutional capital coming in. So some of the sort of the nice wins about reduce waste, improve sustainability, and all of that sort of stuff are actually really, becoming more and more prevalent in the living sector, where previously perhaps they haven't been. And then, just driving certainty of delivery and cost in a market like this.
So maybe if we pick up on that thread, Matt, because you probably have been thinking about this longer than anyone here, with ICD's inception. So what was the journey of 2009, and maybe explain ICD's link back to CIMC? And so obviously it was something you're always very interested in doing. And what were the challenges then? And why do you feel like the and I think it's not you alone or us alone thinking this. You can see the whole market is really now going, there's something we all should be trying to do. Now, who's pulled it off yet? No one's done it at scale. But what do you think there has been the change in conditions and perceptions over the last sort of 15 years?
Yeah. So you're expanding a little bit more on who we are and where we're derived from. So it stems back to CIMC, China International Marine Container Group, based out of Shenzhen. They're the largest shipping container manufacturers in the world. And since 2006, they've also been the largest volumetric modular manufacturers produced out of southern China. Now, the CEO and chairman of CIMC is actually the founder of ICD Property, and hence his vision. He sees how modular can influence and play a big part in the development industry of Australia. So back in 2009 to about 2012-13, when we were looking at modular, there was a number of challenges that we faced. Starting off with, I guess, designing for modular. It's because there's a volumetric structure. There are some constraints or rigidity to how it can be put together, all of which can be addressed if designed up front. A lot of times, the way in which we go about development here, you design, you get planning approval, blah, blah, and then you think about how it gets put together in construction. So it's about changing that mindset and trying to design for modular, design for that efficiency up front. Other concerns were around about quality, it's an unknown aspect compared to what we're used to in Australia. And that goes for anything else. Like you mentioned about pods, there was that same concern about pods when they were first introduced. That concern gets alleviated when you see more of that being delivered and it being as good, if not better, with all the other benefits of efficiency and being able to manufacture off-site in a controlled environment. That's essentially what volumetric modular is. It's taking all that, built in a factory, but to a larger scale, more componentry, all being done off-site. Other things, I guess the the on-site construction. So once you've built these modules off-site and then you bring them into Australia, then you're putting them onto site. The unfamiliarity from a contractor's perspective, how do we do this thing? We've never done it before. There's the risk elements to it. There's the uncertainty. Face all those challenges as well. Financing it, the way in which our finance is done in the Australian construction context is a QS would go out, they'll certify what's been put onto site, and because that's secured to the land which they have security over, now we can pay.
And as a builder, like if you wanted an offsite payment, which Matt, you would appreciate, usually what people will say is, yeah, great, you have to provide a bank guarantee.
Give me a BG.
Which, that economics does not work for volumetric modular because it's a very different economy of what you need to buy up front.
Yep. And that actually touches, I guess, on another element around who are you dealing with? Who are these modular manufacturers? If it's Joe Bloke because he's decided, modular is trending, and then sets up a shop, or not even sets up a shop, maybe works with a third-party manufacturer overseas, you've got challenges there. But if you're asking for a bank guarantee and some certainty from a sponsor, you want to know that you're dealing with, a credible party that's had a long tenure of doing this, that has good financial strength behind them. And so, like fast forward, think about, I guess, that concern around finance and providing security. That's why we deal with CIMC. They've been in the business for 20 years on this particular division, but as a company, they're the top 500 company in the world. They are well recognized by all the banks globally. And in terms of providing security, providing bank guarantees when it's being manufactured all the way until it gets secured on site, that's not an issue. And that's how we address some of these concerns that were prevalent back then, but now are being addressed and with great certainty. I think probably the reason why we're even talking now is the massive challenge in construction industry, both from a construction cost perspective and availability. So that's really been the catalyst for us to go, okay, we need to find a solution to delivering. Otherwise, we're all going to fall behind on delivering the necessary supply.
And availability, we sit here in Melbourne, and probably availability of builders and contractors in the resi space probably we wouldn't sit here and say that's a problem for us. But our counterparts in Brisbane and Sydney would probably say totally differently of like, it's the biggest problem. Our problem in our local context is probably sales price and cost price are too close to each other. Yeah. The northern states is, the sales price is good, but the cost price, because of availability and reliability, is a huge, huge barrier. Like I hear that all the time. We don't do much work in Queensland, but we hear that constantly from developers. It's like, I've got all these great projects, I just can't get a builder. I can't be sure when it's, of how it's going to work or lock down a price. Like I'm sure it's all different depending on who you are, but like seems like that's a massive problem.
Yeah, and it flows to time to build in those states as well. Like if we were looking at the same project we're delivering in Melbourne and looking at it in Sydney, you add 12 months.
Yeah.
And straight away, that's a returns problem because you're just burning cash and not getting cash flow in for an extra 12 months. So yeah, it's interesting. I'd love to see with modular some really uniform sort of government support for it, because if you're a group like ours and a lot of developers that work multi-state, one of the biggest challenges we see, and Build to Rent's a perfect example of it, is every state goes off in its own direction and they all get a version of the same things. And that comes right down to, really developer-led stuff like, land tax incentives and all of those kind of stuff. But back to ADG versus BATS, like if you really want to get a credible modular business going in Australia, you can't have different design standards in the two, largest states, And that should be a really easy fix. Like it should be, if we could just get, governments always have great intention, but they just work too much in isolation. And if given we're coming from a standing start here to a degree, like now's the time for government to actually align, and for us collectively as industry to lobby and be like, hey, it's actually really a big problem for us all when you go off state by state. Like you need, and if you look at UK as a classic, it has its own problems across a lot of things, but both in Build to Rent as a sector, but also in modular, like government support has been national and then just flowed through. So it's just evolved quicker.
Well, I think which is hard to appreciate because I think in Australia for years, like it's just one of these logical truisms, like surely modular makes sense. Yeah. Like I think anyone would go, oh, it must make sense, right? But it's the economics have never stacked up, and then it's done as a niche. And I talk about large scale volumetric modular because obviously there's really good modular suppliers doing schools, hospitals. Our friends at Modscape, those guys, they do amazing stuff and have done for years and years and years. But if you talk large scale modular, residential predominantly, it's never really taken off. Like it's been done in bits and pieces, but in Australia, never at scale. It's never been considered as a mainstream approach to construction. But if you look in other countries in the world, it is very much now the mainstream. I can't remember if it was Matt, you or Andrew telling me about the percentage in like Singapore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was done through government mandates. So they're now above 45% of all new homes being built using either prefab or modular construction. And it's a bit of a different scenario in the way that their government is structured. But, they basically mandated that for 65% of government land, you had to use PPVC, which is an acronym for basically prefabricated modules. And so...
And what was their driver behind mandating it like that? Was it to improve the industry? Was it to drive costs? Why would they intervene in the market so firmly?
Yeah, I think similar to the challenges we're facing around efficiencies of site, there were safety challenges or workforce constraints. Yeah. They also had some neighbours pretty close by that were doing it really, really well. And so, and Singapore's a pretty financially savvy place and understood that, you build an industry and you build at scale, you build efficiencies in, and so the cost follows. The cost is really an outcome. Like everyone wants to talk about cost, but cost is an outcome of doing quality, safety, program really well. Cost savings is the outcome of that rather than...
I think we say that to people we're talking to now is like, yeah, this is what we think our price is really competitive now, but we think we'll get better and better as we do it. Like it's really hard to know exactly the productivity you'll achieve in the Australian context, but you can't help but think we're going to get better at it the more we do it. Yeah. But that's an interesting way of looking at it is like, yeah, it will be an outcome as you improve the industry.
Yeah. And look, that's with any, because one of the things that, we start to treat housing like a product, and which, can be a little bit jarring when you first say that. But I mean, if you look at Sweden, which is like the real extreme, which is like 80% of homes are built using prefab or modular.
And what was Sweden's history to get to that point? Is it the weather constraints or is it government intervention?
More weather constraints and also just, IKEA, another...
just a load of Allen keys.
Yeah, that's it, exactly.
Just little dongles are holding them all together.
That's it. Just don't read the instruction manual.
One of the saddest places on earth, go to like the IKEA return department where you just see people coming in with half-built shelves, just feeling, you can just see the defeat on their face where the Billy or the Maxi has defeated them and they're just coming to return it going, I think it was missing a piece.
Yeah, that's it.
Imagine doing that for your whole house.
I
know.
But no, so when you start to treat it as a product, you start to, look at more manufacturing. And so like any product, like with Tesla's, the way Elon started dropping the prices, he's built more of them because you get more efficient and you can start to do that. And I think that's a natural outcome over time as this scales. So, and I think let's not try and invent the wheel here. Like it's been done overseas before really successfully and not in all places. So let's learn the lessons from places where it hasn't gone well. But I think there's some real lessons from Singapore and Scandinavia around what we could do here.
Yeah. In Australian context, imagining 50% of housing coming from modular is just an extraordinary idea from where we're at the moment. But if you think of the challenges we have as a country in housing, clearly something has to be different than what it is at the moment. Like, clearly what we're doing at the moment doesn't work.
And I feel like the government it's got two hats on, right? Like one is they want to drive supply, but then the populist vote is the concern, the impact it's going to have on labor. But the reality is we need so much more supply. The labor we have can be spread across more projects and deliver more outcomes. It's going to be better for the economy. They've got to try and educate people that that's what we're trying to do here. We're not trying to take away from the work that is going to be delivered. We're supplementing it. And you mentioned before, Andrew, about it not stacking up for large projects, and I think that can be true when you bucket all big projects together. I think volumetric really hums along the best for certain typologies. And if we can say, let's do these in modular, because it absolutely makes sense. And I'm talking about things like purpose-built student accommodation, hotels, build to rent, where you've got a single institutional owner. Those sort of things are extremely efficient for modular. Custom, high-end owner-occupier apartments, large-scale offices where there's not that constraint of walls and large amounts of plumbing and electricals involved in a small constraint box. That should be done by local trades because it still remains to be more efficient in cost and from a time perspective.
Yeah, and even to your point about what we see pricing them is that still 50% of the price is onshore. So if you take our example where we're like, hey, we've got this amazing supplier we want to work with in CIMC and ICD, and they build this great product at a really good price. But the interesting thing is, like, even doing that, still 50% of the construction cost is local.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, so it's not, and I would say certainly in Melbourne, there's a whole lot of projects sitting on the shelf that if you could get the construction price down by 10%, that'd be built. Tomorrow.
For sure.
Yeah.
And if you think, I mean, it's a bit simplistic, but if you could just double the volume of construction through using this, and you're saying half of it is still onshore, you haven't taken anything away. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like you've just doubled it. So you've got the same quantum of value of work happening onshore, but you've doubled supply.
And imagine the Brisbane in this. Well, imagine the Brisbane in the Sydney context of like they've got demand clearly, but just don't the price of construction again high or uncertain. Like I can't imagine that if we had this more certain supply of product, that it would be shrinking the pie. It would be expanding the pie, you'd imagine.
Yeah. And that becomes a self-fulfilling aspect about affordability. More supply, then suddenly there's more options for people. Rent comes down and prices, moderate as well.
And I think, Matt, you were touching on something interesting, which I think, Andrew, so you've been doing the work now with us for 6 months and talking to lots of potential customers, understanding projects. And one of the things you do say all the time to people is, this is not the answer to every question. Like it's you're touching on, Matt. So what do you see for the sort of volumetric that we're considering? What do you see as the projects that make sense and the projects that don't make sense?
Yeah, and Matt sort of touched on it there, so I'll sort of just build on that. But, and probably just taking one step back is just one other thing that always sticks to my mind is like we talk about doubling, but like if you look at the Productivity Commission in 2025,
which every night before bed, I just, you can't put it down.
I'm a numbers guy, but they said we're spending 53% more hours per dwelling than we were in 1995. Like, that is crazy. Like, we are going backwards as a construction industry, taking 53% more hours per dwelling. Like, what is going on? So, and we don't have a demand problem.
I think to put a little bit of defense to ourselves, there's a lot more in a house now than there would be. I think if you spoke to house builders, houses are a lot more complicated than probably the house.
And the regulatory environment.
The regulatory, whether they need to be more complicated, probably a different debate, but they certainly would be more complicated than a house built 30 years ago.
And so, you could discount that a little, but still, we haven't improved. We haven't improved. And so I think, when to your point, your question around where does modular work, it's where, there's things like repeatable floor plates, repeatable typologies. Where does offsite manufacturing really make sense and when it becomes a product? So certainly where we're looking at, institutional investors with large portfolios, national portfolios, where you can look at it as a product, where we could be talking to Ash Morgan about, a standard sort of 1-bedroom apartment or a studio apartment or a 2-bedroom apartment. And, there will always be, until the states align on the planning requirements, there will always be nuances in each market. But, starting to get kind of some templates for what products can look like. And that's where it really makes sense. You are limited by the size of the modules, that you don't have that limitation with traditional construction because you've got to transport them. So less so on the ship, but through our streets, once you go over 3.5 meters, you need a pilot. So there's some logistic constraints and that can be solved, but it's an additional cost and additional logistics. So there's all these kind of push-pull things, but I certainly think, student accom, as you mentioned, is a natural for modular. Build to rent and, investor grade, build to sell, I think, which is not too far from build to rent and certainly hotels. Again, sorry to quote numbers. I know I'm sounding more and more like a nerd than I just look.
I didn't think that.
But there's I think 28,000 hotel beds short in Brisbane before 2032. Like, how on earth are they going to build that?
Yeah,
well, on top of all the enabling infrastructure and all the worker shortage, 42,000 workers short. Like, it's crazy. So, and I think
it's really interesting now, and we definitely are not becoming a politics podcast because but the politics of immigration, there's very much this thing of like, how can there be this immigration if you don't have the houses for it?
Yeah. You need the workers, but you can't host them.
And we need the workers. So, and we would argue our industry needs workers too. Like, so it's a really, this housing, how do we get housing, with labour shortages? It's a very vexed challenge. Yeah.
And I think there's always a temptation for everyone to sort of blame the government. Like, it's a bit of a scapegoat for every problem at the moment. Like, everybody loves to blame the government. But I do think as well, there's the opportunity for industry to really prove how well this can work in the private sector and say, look at the efficiency we can get in BTR and hotels and student accom, so that the government goes, whoa, okay, come help us. So I think there's that.
I always drive past amazed. I look at those, like the Homes Vic product that they're building, and again, I don't get into politics, but it makes a lot of sense to rebuild those, in my opinion. And I'm biased, I'm a builder, so if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. You know what we need more building. But I look at those and I'm like, that would be the perfect product for volumetric modular. Have a standard design so you could roll out 40,000 of these. There's not a big drain on the labour pool that should be building other things, or not as big a drain. I'm with you. I don't think the governments will be the first to move on this. I think it will be private investors who really do move the needle, like companies like yourself.
You've got to I don't know if you agree, Matt, sort of take it in bite-sized chunks and take development and split it between developers and development and finance.
Yep.
Because yes, we'll sort out the finance, but I think they're two things with two different challenges. And developers, I think it's a change in how we're used to doing things. Yeah. Like, it's much more upfront design. There's potentially more upfront capital required. But I think the development industry is willing to take on that challenge, and we can be a bit more nimble and we'll change. The challenge is you can only do that bit when the developer knows that coming behind it is the capital, not builder, but as in the finance to actually fund the thing. Yeah, because like we were chatting last week, you got to make this decision early. You got to make this decision before you put in your planning. So, I mean, if you own the site, maybe a bit different, but let's say you're buying a site, you're making this decision as part of your acquisition process.
So that's an interesting point. So you're obviously development director for Ash Morgan. It does a lot of investments of all different things. If you were to go to your board or investment committee and say, hey, I want to do this project, I want to do it as a modular construction, what would be the challenges that you would have explaining to people why that would be a good approach?
Yeah, I think there would be an uncertainty about modular. So I think the first questions, and I think Matt alluded to the fact that we're getting over them, which is is a pod bathroom or is a modular thing a worse product? And now that you can go in and touch and feel these things, I think we can all accept, to the layman who comes in at the end, you'll never know. So I think you can solve that really quickly, which is sort of a fear of the unknown. You can solve it by saying, yeah, no, this will exist, and you would sell the benefits, time, ESG, all of those sorts of things. But they would rightly say, how will this be funded? And especially if we talk about sort of, if the way Australia is going is offshore manufacture of these pods, we talked about, you just can't realistically have a BG for 50%.
No.
For 25% of a construction project, up front. It's not real. Yeah. And so we have to get probably the banks, you've got to start probably with the big four and work back if you want to do stuff at scale on board with how we solve this. And I mean, something I probably should have done it before this podcast is, it's obviously not insurmountable because the world is doing it. Yeah, it's happening in the UK. It's happening everywhere else. So people are funding these and not having issues. I mean, we seem to have a real reluctance to things like insurance bonds in Australia, but maybe that's a good middle ground here where yes, there's probably still a decent dead cost there, but it might give the right comfort for somebody to actually say, hey, I'm gonna put it on the line and go and build 300 modular.
Matt, did you just say that? We're going to build 300?
Yeah, let's sign them up. So you would have been talking with financial institutions and lenders and all that type of stuff. What's the feedback you've been getting of where they're at in their thinking of how modular is going to fit this puzzle?
Absolutely. And to give some context, my background was I actually used to work at ANZ in the Institutional Property Group. And I remember...
You actually look like a banker. He looks like a nerd. You look like a banker. You look like a golfer, like a social golfer.
Even you're my boss, I won't say what you look
Yeah,
like.
that's exactly right. I'm way too vain.
We all hold back our opinions. And I distinctly remember a modular project landing on my desk, and everyone was scratching their heads because, we're so used to the framework of project finance, but people don't blink an eyelid about trade finance and how something gets manufactured overseas, has ISO compliance, and gets shipped over here. It's recognizing it's a different type of risk and a different mechanism that's required to finance modular. But again, this comes back to, if there are concerns about modular, probably the way to address them is to deal with a very experienced modular manufacturer and supplier and logistics company. This is me probably promoting CIMC, but they've got a means in which they finance it with the big banks, because the big banks recognize their sponsorship, and there's mechanisms of letters of credit, which then give CIMC the assurance that there is funding for this project. And then for the better part of 70% of the cost of the modules can actually be cash flow funded by CIMC. So after a deposit, that component gets funded by CIMC all the way until it lands on site and is locked in place, in which case it turns over into a project finance, a typical project finance, which all the big banks here and also the alternative financiers are very familiar with. So there is definitely means to fund it, and there's comfort levels, especially globally, or the international banks, but the local banks are exploring it. CBA has been very out in the public saying that this is an area that they can see, and they're exploring it more. The banks naturally are slow movers on change of policies and all that sort of stuff, but yeah, there are means to finance it, which is really exciting.
Yeah. And I know, like our banks, NAB, so we have a great relationship with them, and I know that they are, when you talk to them about it, they're like, no, we want to look at everything to sort of support housing supply. So, they're absolutely, open to all these sort of ideas, which is, I don't think you would have got that, certainly not
5 years ago.
6 years ago. I don't think anyone would be talking like that. So, yeah, that's fantastic. So, there's obviously, and one thing you sort of said it in passing, Matt, but like I think that point around, you see IMC, and they're not the only ones of this sort of scale. They're one of the absolute largest in the world. But we think about housing as like this bespoke artisan, small, medium enterprises doing it. When you think about it as a manufactured product, it will inherently be huge companies doing this.
Yes.
Because you cannot, much like cars, manufacturing to drive price needs scale. It's how it works. So that's why I hear people say, why can't we do this in Australia? And it's like, the sheer scale that you need to do this at to get the price point of the modules down, I don't think that's the kind of manufacture that is the Australian future, personally. Like, I think we're really good at bespoke, highly technological, manufacture. CIMC probably have ambitions to do 30,000 modules a year sort of thing. Like, a significant volume with huge factory capacity, and you see that. So,
and you need that order book, which Australia probably can't do. Whereas internationally, like if CIMC have the international factory, you can take orders from the world over. If there was a British company, I forget what it was. LNG was like 2023, and it collapsed like £500 million in debt or whatever it was. And that's such a shame, because it was like,
I know, yeah,
it was doing really well, but it proved, and the UK by scale is actually easier than Australia, because more people, more compact. And so if they couldn't get the pipeline, it probably says that at the moment we couldn't get the pipeline here. So it's nice to want to have the commercial grade factory here, but
because
probably
people
isn't
are
real.
unfamiliar with modular, I think it's drawing similarities to other industries. Look at the automotive industry. Like, if it made sense to do it here, it would still be here.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Unfortunately, the way which we get efficiencies is it is manufactured offshore. And you're seeing a change in that industry itself as well. Like, there's the German automotive industry and other European industries versus some of the Asian and Indian manufacturers. There's greater efficiencies, and they're getting better at their product as well. So people are like, oh, well.
And I think in Australia, like, let's work out where it makes best for the local industry. So, you've heard of the Built and Wes Farmers.
Yeah.
And look, they're really
stuff.
Yeah, and they've looked at sort of things like hospitals, prisons, a lot more social infrastructure, schools and things. And I think that does make a lot of sense, the local industry, because there's probably not the same volume in that. And for where it is a little bit more bespoke and customized, that's probably something, where the local industry can support. And Modscape does a great job, as well as also Fleetwood and a number of other providers that do that. And there'll be that place in the market. But I guess what we're talking about here is that volumetric modular, where we're looking at, the really large scale and that repeatability to get that scale, to get the cost down. So I think there will be, there's different parts of the market, and we're sort of talking about a niche spot here, but MMC in general, I think, will over time come across all sectors in all markets, and just, it'll balance out over time.
Because this is the thing, you do need the price point for the module to make sense, because you're inherently putting costs into the building to build a modular. Like the transport costs become much higher because you're transporting, in one way, shape or form, a whole lot of air that you wouldn't usually transport on a normal construction project. You kind of end up putting more structure into it, because you need structure to lift it and support it and ship it and transport it. So you end up, this is always a barrier, as it makes lots of sense, but the reality is you kind of put more structural requirements into each module, and that's a cost on every module. So you do need the module price itself to be really competitive. Otherwise, you add those things in. So unless you can build that module at a really good price, you're starting behind the eight ball.
That's a really good point you made, Devo, as well, around volumetric. And we've been mentioning that word a number of times, volumetric modular. The premise, the base of it is, for CIMC anyway, is it's a structural steel box, which can take the lateral pressures of being shipped. And they've used that capability to go, well, we can go up 40 stories high. But all that steel that goes into it, there's a cost associated with it. You wouldn't use this same product to do a 2 or 3 story house here.
If you did it on a house, it wouldn't make any sense.
Yeah. It's overspent.
Really robust house.
It would be. But it's just cost prohibitive. And so when people come to us, we want to do, all these townhouses and modules, so that's great. And I think there is a product out there for you, but it's not this one.
Which I think that people are out there servicing that market as we speak. Like I don't know a lot of details, but I believe the guys from Golden Age are looking at stuff in that sort of space. And like there is people looking at that townhouse type development, because again, that's a very specific price point too, and a very specific type of product. So
there's a great show on Saturdays called Epic Builds, which is Adam Spencer, and that's exactly that. The more people that can watch it and look at what modular does is fantastic. So Epic Builds, which is like the challenge of how do you build a house in under 90 days, and they go to places like King Island and things. So, and that's all local suppliers, and that is a really important part of it. And it's great because it shows all these innovative businesses that, one of the challenges we have in media at the moment is that everybody loves to promote the negative stories. So we've all heard the negative stories, and we don't need to go into them in this podcast, but there's plenty of negative stories about
when you
modular.
Say the negative. Oh, you mean the projects that haven't worked well?
Yeah.
But I think that's part of it though, right? Like it's, again, it's a little bit like electric cars. Like I've had a lot of electric cars on the journey. You hear a lot about electric cars that catch fire. You never really hear about petrol cars that catch fire. More petrol cars catch fire than electric cars, but it's because it's a novel technology. So lots of construction projects, as we all could attest in this room, have gone really badly and had a lot of problems. And equally, there's been modular projects that, especially in Australia, where it's an immature market, there's been problems with the execution.
And we need to learn the lessons 100%. From them. But I think that there's also a whole bunch of projects that have gone really well. Now I'm really happy that Epic Builds is on to talk about some of those, modular suppliers that have been around for a long time that are doing a really good job. I mean, I think that's, there's good and bad in every industry and in every technology. And so learning from the bad, and which we're not good at, and promoting the good is really important.
So Andrew and Matt, jump in. What are the challenges?
Which one?
No, oh my God.
Anyone's going to jump in without that.
I was thinking this side of the table, right? I was thinking this side of the table. So what are the challenges? Obviously, there's compliance challenges. There's the industry understanding. So what are those sort of technical stuff that we sort of, as we really going into this, what are we sort of kicking over and going, these are challenges to be solved?
Yeah, I mean, compliance is the big one, and Matt raised it, and I'd probably extend him one step further and say, well, because now we're seeing a lot of challenges with getting builders in Queensland, and you're seeing builders migrate up from New South Wales. But like you mentioned around regulatory framework, I think there needs to be a standardized regulatory framework for both conventional and modular across Australia, because now you've got this Design and Builders Practitioner Act. Oh, are you registered for that? Oh no, are they a Victorian builder or a Queensland builder? Do they know how to build in New South Wales? Builders are builders, but you said
We don't like, that's not our mark.
sorry.
How dare you?
There are better builders than other builders.
How dare you? We are. I do not want to be considered a commodity.
But I think there needs to be a standardized framework across, and there needs to be one that is designed for modular to ensure that good modular gets built. To work within a conventional framework, you get inefficiencies. So one of them, which is the most prevalent, is how do you certify your electricals and your structure and all that stuff when that's being manufactured in China? Well, you bring your certifier from here over there, they stay there, they will look at every member and do spot checks on electricals and all that. Now, there's a cost of that person going over there, flights, accommodation, all that sort of stuff. That's just one example, but all these things need to be accounted for, and it creates that inefficiency that Dev was saying,
which
about
we would
from
never
start.
do for a TV or a car or again, it shows the immaturity of the market. But you would never make, that would be the stupidest thing in the world if you said, oh, you can't sell that TV here unless an Australian inspector's gone and
ticked off the electrics in the back.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. But I mean, I suppose the one positive in that is we are already doing it for all the elements,
Yeah.
So like we're buying facades from China and somebody's going over and inspecting them and saying they meet our standards. So at least we've proven we can do it. And it might just be, there'll be an iteration here where the first few years of this as it takes off will be inefficient like that. And then maybe after 5 years when everyone realizes, hey, what, somebody local could just as easily and credibly be signing off that the electrics in the TV are fine.
Yeah.
But we probably just can't presume to get there day one. Yeah, it's going to be a little bit of a journey.
And I think like any new technology, a lot of it is around confidence across the whole, supply chain and value chain really, because we've had plenty of tenders where we put in and it's cheaper, it's faster, it's extra yield. And the client's sort of gone, yeah, but nobody's really done that in Australia yet at that sort of scale. And so I think that will take, these first few projects before they get off the ground, they're going to be really hard. And going through compliance, like you mentioned, working out what can be done virtually, what can be done by third parties, what do the certifiers really want, what are the consultants who also got to put their name to, what do the trades have got to put their name to it, all of those, kind of that whole value chain. What do we need as builders to do our due diligence? Because ultimately, if it's offshore, we're the head contractor, all the liability and warranties will rest with us.
Yeah.
All of these things. And this is probably why it's been so challenging, because Australia is highly regulated and it is hard to get this to work. And so you really do need to invest time and effort to be able to unlock this. And I think the opportunity is huge. But for the first movers, and there's plenty, it's not just Kapitol looking at this, there's Free City in New South Wales, there's others that are doing this. It's going to be really hard to get these first few projects off the ground.
You probably need to collectively get a consortium together to get these things going that picks all the right pieces of the puzzle. So if you've got Kapitol as the builder, you get the developer, get on board early, whether it's CBA or somebody, bring all those people, need to be on board day one, which is unusual for the industry, because we like to do it piece by piece and we like to follow the timeline of we designed it. And
we've actually done a pretty good job of getting a consultant team together of architects. We've got a couple who really understand it, of what is a good modular design. And again, that's another thing we've learned is it's not so easy to go along as I've got a building that already exists and then try and retro it into being modular. You kind of want to start with it being modular. Well, not kind of. You want to start with it. Otherwise, you will end up with something that doesn't quite work.
Yeah.
Or maybe not work as well.
Cost efficiency and time efficiency of delivering it.
Yeah. Yep. Building surveyors, again, the building surveyor, the fire engineer is amazingly important. Because again, that is probably one of the big compliance pieces. Is very different.
Nothing is deemed to satisfy under the NCC for modular, so everything's performance based. So it's a lot of work.
But that comes back to in the long term, if this is to be viable, you actually do need government support for this centrally, because the NCC needs to change that. You can't be getting
you don't want every
fire
time
engineered solutions every time you get a modular building in.
Yeah. So I think we've done a pretty good job over the first sort of Matt, we've probably been working with you guys for about a year now on this, is of building a bit of an ecosystem of people who do understand it, who you don't just shy away from all the challenges that we've got to solve for all these different projects.
The other big bit is the trade partners. And if you look back to what we were getting 12 months ago in terms of even just pricing from contractors that didn't understand the scope to, what do you mean I just grab that cable and, do that here, and the extra kind of, risk allowance that we've put into the prices. But working with our national partners and actually taking them on the journey as much, and this is a journey for everyone really. And so getting the trade partners on the journey to come with us as much as the consultants to understand the exact scope and means sharper pricing. It means they get a level of confidence. So yeah, that's what we've been, investing the time to really build. So just, the next step is to get, some clients that are willing to come on that journey with us as well.
So maybe to wrap up, maybe if we could all just think about what would good look like in this space in 5 years' time, both sort of where we're at and, maybe regulatory as well. But yeah, Matt, what's your sort of 5 year ideal vision of this?
There's a lot of excitement in the space. And Matt touched on it a bit before about the convincing the boards, and ultimately those that we are now exploring projects with excitement. It stems from the boards of, be it private or government, going, this is the way to do it. Because the commitment needs to come from upfront. And once you've got the agreement to do it that way, it becomes an end-to-end process. We've spent a lot of time figuring out all the answers and using those answers to then convince the board of these big development groups. And then from there, we can commence on projects. Now, the reason why we're having these conversations is because there's projects that aren't working, which are already being designed. But 5 years' time, we want to be talking to developers that go, that's my piece of land and I'm going to develop it with Modular, and I'm now going to engage this consortium up front. They've got all the bits and pieces. They've got the design, they've got the builder, they've got the modular manufacturer, and it's going to be streamlined end to end. I think that's going to have more prevalent.
And you could imagine that world where you're a developer and you have your student accommodation product where you've got a standard module design. And so you're not starting from scratch and all that inefficiencies of that. It's like, I know that's the broadly what I want for my student accommodation product. That's what I want for my build-to-rent product. That's what I want for my, hotel product to a degree.
And everybody has that already to a degree. It just then becomes bespoke. You could look at, you could go to Mirvac, Greystar, Sentinel, Home. They'll all give you their build-to-rent design guide today. It's just that every single building then gets designed bespoke and they sort of align about 60% to the original design guide. But where you want to get to is you give that design guide and it works for modular and doesn't need to deviate.
Which is a term you use a lot, is design for manufacture.
Different
way of thinking about it.
Manufacture and assembly. Yeah, that's right. And that mindset piece. And I think to your point around, what does good look like in 5 years? I think at the moment, modular's there almost to solve problems. Like at the moment, it's like, oh, well, I've got a problem. Let's just see if modular will work. My hope is that, in 5 years' time, it's so mainstream that's not there to fix problem. It's just, this is what I typically do, and that it just becomes mainstream. We're not trying to, retrofit projects and things like that. And, the thing is, the other bit is that kind of certainty piece. You touched on it really earlier, Matt, and unfortunately we haven't had time to unpack that. But the other benefit that modular brings is certainty. Brings certainty on cost because you know really early what your cost is going to be. And once you lock that design in, which can be a challenge for developers, but you design freeze and it's no changes because once you start mass production, you're not moving basins and things like that. So you get some cost certainty, reducing construction contingency, you get program certainty, and you get supply chain certainty in terms of your workforce. And so
I think clients and developers would secretly hate the having to do that, that actually love the doing it. Like actually that it's done. Like even if we wanted to, we can't change it. Yeah.
But if you look at other sectors, look at like the tech sector and stuff, a lot of that mantra is like good enough, and move on. Whereas we're just obsessed in property with like reinterrogating, revisiting, looking back. And so often I'm sure you get the marginal 1 or 2%ers, but does the end user realize it's probably good for us?
Yes.
Like it probably is. I remember like it showing my own age, but like when I started at uni in the UK, one of our lecturers gave us this book called The Toyota Way.
Oh, yeah.
And it's all about lean construction.
Yeah.
It's actually a ripper book.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking like 2005.
Yeah.
We're talking about that. Yeah. So 20 years later, like maybe there's some momentum.
Yeah, we want
to be
50
like, hey,
years before we really adopt whether, it's a good idea. We don't want to rush.
People have
into
been thinking
these
about it a
things.
long
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
good. Yeah. I mean, I would say my sort of 5-year dream, not dissimilar to what you just said, Andrew. Like, I just want it to be the norm. Like, I
Yeah.
want to look at a potential acquisition, in the Melbourne CBD and go straight off the bat, right, that's 400 units. I already know the design of all 400 units, give or take. We've changed the facade or whatever and put some different common area in. And I know that the current box rate for those 500 units is, 475 grand for X.
Mm.
And let's go. Let's take that pre-development time to be 9 months, because you get the permit application in 2 months, because there's nothing to do. There's so much dead money in pre-construction. Like the numbers the numbers we spent pre-construction on in Docklands is mind blowing. Yeah, and all developers face that. So you pull this to the fore. It actually does. I know we're not saying it solves every problem.
Because then I think about the construction price and I'm like, oh God, you should have been more on the other end.
Yeah, I should have kept some. Yeah, so it doesn't solve all problems, as in it shouldn't just be, hey, here's a problem site, can Modular fix it? But as an industry, there's a whole load of inefficiencies that it really can help. And some of them we probably don't even realise yet. Yeah, where if you could just say, you know what, and then I harp on about it, but if governments were on board and they're just tick boxing, they've done it for those smaller houses, haven't they? The sort of, the pre-approved, as long as it was in XYZ criteria. Like, imagine you could get there. You've got a 400 unit tower, and as long as it's within the heights and the pre-approved ticks of the modular, it's a 3-month approval.
Which, if you look at the Metricons of the world, they do an amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Like the scale, the speed, the price point they do it at. If we can replicate that in volumetric, large scale projects and move the needle, it'll be incredible. Yeah, no, I think certainly for Kapitol and for myself, what we look at is if we can get this to work, which I think we will, we won't be alone. There's a lot of really great companies working on this at the moment, is that it will genuinely move the needle on housing supply.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's just going to add capacity. And if we, to your point earlier, Andrew, as we get good at it, we will drive the price point down, right? And as we start driving the price down, that's just good for everyone.
Yeah.
And it's just going to become a bit of a cycle of the better we get at this, the more refined, the more we understand how we keep getting better, then you're going to significantly make a whole lot of projects that didn't stack before possible, and a whole lot more housing for the whole country, which I don't think you need to watch. You don't have to read the newspaper too often or listen to the news too often to work out that is one of the great crises of Australian sort of society at the moment. So great. All right. Thank you so much. Number 3 in there. I think we've made some
best one yet.
I think it's the best one yet too. I'm
You're just saying that because Matt and Matt are here.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Exactly.
Never makes it public.
Yes. Anyway, thank you so much for your time.
All right. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Matt.